The cake was coming down. Fast. 1 second I'm standing there with my champagne glass raised, about to toast my daughter, about to say something from my heart that I'd been rehearsing for weeks. The next second, Derek's hands are on the back of my head, and he's pushing my face straight into a towering masterpiece of white and gold frosting. My nose hits first. Then my forehead. Then everything. The room erupts. Not with gasps. Not with shock. With laughter. Full, belly-shaking laughter from 200 people who paid good money to watch me get humiliated by the man who'd just become my son-in-law. Have you ever noticed how a room full of strangers laughing at you sounds completely different than when it's just one person? It's not funny anymore. It's brutal. It's tribal. It's the sound of belonging to a crowd you didn't know had turned against you. Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. I'm Raymond Corrin, by the way, and I never thought I'd live long enough to be mocked by the man who married my daughter. I stand there, frosting dripping down my suit, a good suit, I might add, the sweet smell of vanilla mixing with something I can't quite name. Shame, maybe. Anger. The cold realization that this day was never going to be what I thought it would be. Derek's laughing too. His head thrown back, genuinely delighted with himself. Guess that's the only thing he can afford to contribute, he shouts, and the room erupts again. I look at Elena. My daughter. The light of my life. The reason I've been quiet about my money for the past 5 years. The reason I paid for every flower, every candle, every second of that live band playing in the background. She's giggling. Nervously, sure. But she's laughing. And in that moment, something inside me breaks. Not from the humiliation. Not from the laughter. But from watching the one person I'd tried to protect choose a stranger over her own father. I don't yell. I don't throw my glass. I don't do any of the things a man's ego might scream at him to do. Instead, I turn slowly toward the event coordinator, a young woman I'd hired personally through my catering company, and I lean in close. I whisper something into her ear. Her face goes completely white. Then I turn around, walk out of that reception hall, and disappear into the night. Behind me, the band keeps playing. The guests keep eating. Derek keeps celebrating his cruelty like it was a victory. Nobody followed me. Nobody even noticed I was gone. But 5 minutes later, everything changed. The music stopped. The laughter died. The entire event, all of it, came to a grinding halt. And Derek Vaughn? He was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Let me take you back. Back before Derek Vaughn ever stepped foot in my life. Back to when it was just me and Elena, trying to figure out how to keep going after losing the person who held us together. My wife, Sarah, passed 5 years before that wedding. Cancer. The kind that doesn't give you time to prepare, doesn't give you time to say all the things you want to say. One day you're planning your future together. The next day you're picking out a coffin. Elena was 18 when it happened. That age where you're supposed to be thinking about college and boys and what you want to do with your life. Instead, she was sitting in hospital rooms watching her mother fade away. I remember the day Sarah died. It was a Tuesday. Gray outside. The kind of day that doesn't feel real while it's happening. Elena held her hand while I stood at the foot of the bed, and we both knew it was over. Sarah squeezed my fingers one last time and whispered, "Take care of her, and let her take care of you." I didn't understand that second part. Not yet. After the funeral, people kept asking if I was okay. If Elena was okay. If there was anything they could do. I nodded and thanked them and went back to work. Because that's what men do, right? We work. We push forward. We don't fall apart. But at night, when Elena was upstairs in her room, I'd sit in the kitchen with my coffee getting cold, staring at Sarah's empty chair. I had money back then. Real money. I owned a construction company that was doing well. Really well. We had a nice house, nice cars, nice everything. But none of it mattered anymore because the one person who made it all mean something was gone. That's when I made the decision to sell. Not right away. I gave it a couple of years. Watched Elena go to college. Watched her start to smile again. Watched her become the kind of young woman who made me believe Sarah could see her from wherever she was now. Then I quietly sold the company. Made a deal with the buyer. Kept enough in trusts and investments that I'd never have to work again. Enough that Elena could go to any school, live any way she wanted. But I decided to keep it quiet. I stopped wearing the watches. Stopped talking about the business. Started doing odd jobs around town, handyman work, fixing things, being the guy people called when they needed someone reliable. The money kept coming in steady from my investments, but nobody knew that. To the world, I was just Raymond. The retired guy. The widower getting by. And you know what? I liked it that way. I liked finding out who loved me when they thought I was broke. I liked seeing which friends stuck around when I couldn't buy rounds at the bar. I liked watching people's true colors come out when they thought I had nothing to offer. Elena believed I was broke too. She'd gotten a scholarship to college, worked part-time jobs to help with living expenses. She never asked me for money, which made me proud. That's my girl, I thought. She's strong. She's independent. I never told her the truth because I wanted to see if she'd love me the same way, not as a successful businessman, but as just her dad. A regular guy trying to get by. That's who I was when Derek Vaughn showed up at our front door on a Thursday night in March, all confidence and cologne and promises he had no business making. "Dad, I want you to meet someone," Elena said, and I knew my quiet life was about to get complicated. Derek was the kind of guy you notice immediately. Tall, sharp suit that probably cost more than my truck, that smile that looks like it was designed by a marketing team. He walked into our living room like he was taking inventory of everything we owned and mentally calculating its value. "Mr. Corrin," he said, extending his hand. The handshake was firm. Too firm. The kind where you can tell a man's got something to prove. "Derek Vaughn. I've heard nothing but incredible things about you from Elena." That was a lie. He was already sizing me up, already deciding what category to put me in. I could see it in his eyes. The subtle scan of my jeans, my work boots, the kitchen where we'd been eating dinner when he showed up. "Good to meet you," I said, and I meant it. I wanted to know this guy. I wanted to understand what had my daughter so flushed and nervous and eager to show him off. "Elena tells me you work in construction," he asked, settling onto the couch like he owned it. "Did for a long time. These days I do smaller jobs. Fix things around town. Keeps me busy." He nodded, but I could see the calculation happening. He was doing the math in his head. Older guy. Modest house. Handyman work. She probably doesn't have money either. "Well, that's good," he said, and there was something condescending in his tone. "Honest work and all that. Elena's lucky to have you, but I've got to tell you, she's going to see a very different world now that we're together. I'm going places, Mr. Corrin. Big places. I'm in finance. Investments, real estate deals, the kind of money that changes lives. I plan to take Elena places she never dreamed of." I watched Elena look at him with those eyes full of admiration. She reached over and squeezed his arm, proud of him. Proud to have someone ambitious standing in her living room telling her father about his plans. "That's nice," I said carefully. "Elena's always been good at dreaming big." "Yeah, well, dreams need money to come true," Derek said, and he laughed like he'd made some kind of brilliant observation. "And I've got plenty of it." "Right, babe." Elena smiled, but something in that smile looked rehearsed. like she was practicing the expression she'd wear as his girlfriend, as the girl attached to his success story. We talked for another hour. Derek did most of the talking, which was fine by me. He told stories about deals he'd closed, clients he'd impressed, the apartment he was looking at in the city. He kept touching Elena's leg while he talked, kept pulling her close to his side like she was a possession he was showing off. I noticed he never asked me a single question about myself. Never wanted to know my story, my interests, what mattered to me. To Derek, I was just the previous owner of something he'd already decided to move past. When he left that night, he gave Elena a kiss right there in front of me, nothing inappropriate, but deliberate. A way of claiming her, marking his territory. After she walked him out, she came back and sat next to me on the couch. "He reminds me of you, Dad," she said softly. "When you were younger. That ambition. That confidence." My stomach dropped a little, but I kept my voice level. "Is that so?" I asked. "Yeah. You always taught me that a man should know what he wants and go after it. Derek's like that." I didn't tell her the difference between ambition and arrogance. I didn't tell her that confidence without humility is just another word for delusion. I didn't tell her that I'd spent 20 years building things with my own 2 hands while Derek talked about building things by moving money around. Instead, I put my arm around her and said, "As long as he treats you right, that's all that matters." What I didn't say, what I should have said, was that ambition without character is just hunger. And hungry men will eat anything, even the people who love them. But I was learning my daughter was old enough to make her own mistakes. And Derek Vaughn? He was about to make his biggest one. The engagement announcement came 3 months later. 3 months. That's how long it took Derek to decide Elena was worth keeping around. They got married 9 months after that. A whirlwind. Elena was so caught up in planning, in being in love, in believing she'd found her person. I watched from the sidelines, saying nothing, playing the part of the proud father. But I was paying for everything. That's the thing nobody talks about when it comes to weddings. The cost isn't just money. It's your silence. It's watching your daughter marry a man you don't trust and not saying a word about it. When Elena and Derek started talking about the wedding, Derek made it clear he didn't have the cash for a big event. "Just starting out," he said. "Got some debts to pay off. Student loans, you know how it is." Elena looked embarrassed. "She didn't want to burden me," she said. "Maybe we could do something small?" That's when I made the call to my accountant. I set up a trust just for the wedding. Nothing flashy. I didn't want anyone to trace the money back to me. I worked through a wedding planner, through the catering company I used to own but still had connections with, through vendors I'd done business with for years. 20,000 for the venue. Another 30 for the catering. 15 for the flowers. 10 for the band. 5 for the photographer. Custom cakes, custom invitations, champagne that cost more per bottle than most people spend on groceries. I paid for all of it. Elena thought Derek was covering most of it through a family friend's investment. I never corrected her. I wanted to see if Derek had it in him to step up for her. I wanted to believe that maybe I was wrong about him. But he never stepped up. He just kept talking about how great the wedding was going to be. How impressive. How it would show people what kind of couple they were. All the while, he didn't contribute a single penny. One night, about a week before the wedding, I sat in my workshop looking at the invoices. Everything paid for. Everything perfect. Elena would walk down an aisle I bought, in a dress I paid for, toward a man I couldn't trust, to marry someone who didn't know his father-in-law was keeping his bride's dream alive. I thought about calling it off. About telling Elena everything. About showing her exactly who Derek was before she signed her life away to him. But then I'd think about Sarah's words, "Let her take care of you." And I'd think about how sometimes the only way a person learns is through their own mistakes. So I paid the final invoices, made sure everything was perfect. And I told myself that maybe, just maybe, I was wrong about Derek Vaughn. Maybe love changed people. Maybe my daughter saw something in him I couldn't see. Maybe this would work out after all. I was wrong about all of it. But I didn't know it yet. None of us did. Not until Derek put his hands on the back of my head and shoved my face into that cake. The day of the wedding started like any other day. I woke up early, made coffee, sat in the kitchen where Sarah used to sit. The light came through the window the same way it always did. The birds sang outside like nothing was about to fall apart. I put on the suit I'd bought for the occasion. Dark blue, well-fitted, conservative. The suit of a man who knew his place. The suit of someone who belonged in the background. Elena had asked me not to walk her down the aisle. Derek thought it would be better if his father did it. More modern, he said. More progressive. Elena had looked uncomfortable when she told me, like she was asking permission to hurt me. It's okay, I told her, and I meant it. It's your day, sweetheart. Do what makes you happy. What I didn't say was that I'd already been erased from my daughter's life. I was just the warm-up act now. The supporting character who paid for the show and was expected to sit quietly in the audience. The venue was stunning. I'll give Derek credit for one thing. He had good taste in how things looked. The ballroom had soaring ceilings with crystal chandeliers hanging from gold fixtures. White flowers cascaded down from every corner. The tables were dressed in ivory and gold, with candles that flickered like little promises nobody would keep. I sat in the back row, on the groom's side. That's where they put fathers who weren't important enough for the front. I watched as guests filtered in, wearing their best clothes, their fake smiles, their expensive shoes that would never touch this floor again. The servers moved through the room. I recognized some of them from the catering company. They nodded at me like we shared a secret. We did. We knew who paid for their paychecks that week. Derek stood at the altar in his rented tuxedo, looking nervous and excited like a man about to inherit something valuable. His family sat in the front row, dressed to impress, ready to celebrate their son's upgrade to a better life through marriage. Then the music started, and Elena appeared. She was beautiful. God, she was beautiful. In that white dress that cost more than Derek's first car, with her hair done up and flowers in her hands, she looked like a princess. Like someone's dream come true. And all I could think was, she has no idea who she's marrying. She walked toward Derek, and he grinned that grin of his. The one that looked good in photographs but meant nothing in real life. The one that said he was about to play the part of the happy groom while keeping score of everything he was gaining. The ceremony was quick. Vows that sounded scripted. Rings that looked expensive. A kiss that lasted just long enough to feel performative. And then it was over. Elena Corrin became Elena Vaughn in about 30 minutes, and I became the man in the back row who didn't matter anymore. At the reception, I stayed to myself mostly. Ate the food I'd paid for. Watched people dance to the music I'd hired. Smiled when people came up to tell me how beautiful the wedding was. Your daughter must be so happy, they said. You must be so proud, they said. I nodded and said the right things, but I was watching Derek. Watching how he barely danced with Elena. Watching how he spent more time talking to men who looked like money than to the woman he'd just married. The truth was starting to crystallize. The truth I'd suspected all along but didn't want to admit. Derek wasn't marrying Elena because he loved her. He was marrying the idea of what she represented. And once he realized she didn't have the money he thought she did, once he figured out that her father was just a handyman, he was going to lose interest real fast. I could see it coming from a mile away. I just didn't know how brutally he'd remind me of my place before he did. The moment came faster than I expected. Faster and crueler. Someone called for speeches. That's when the real celebration begins at a wedding, right? When people stand up and tell stories about the couple. When you get to see behind the curtain of their relationship. When truth, sometimes, finds a way to sneak through. Elena's maid of honor went first. Cute story about how they'd been friends since 3rd grade. Made everyone laugh. Made Elena cry happy tears. That's how it's supposed to feel. Then Derek's best man went. Some guy named Travis who worked with him in finance. He told stories about Derek's conquests. His deals. His ability to always come out on top. The crowd loved it. Men slapped him on the back. Women smiled like they were supposed to. I watched Derek beam. He was in his element. This was his show now. The MC looked around the room. Anyone else want to say a few words? Silence. I looked at Elena. She was staring at me. Not her new husband. Not her mother. Me. In that moment, I realized she was hoping I'd say something. That some part of her still wanted her father's blessing, even if she'd never admit it. I stood up. The room didn't get quieter. People were still eating, still talking, still not paying attention to the retired handyman who'd been sitting in the back row all night. But I didn't care. I had something to say. I walked toward the microphone. Derek's smile stayed in place, but I saw his jaw tighten. Just a fraction. Just enough to tell me he didn't want me there. I picked up a champagne glass from a nearby table. My hands were steady. My voice was calm. To my daughter, Elena, I said, you've always been the light of my life. Since the day you were born, you've made me believe that the world was worth fighting for. Your mother would be so proud of you today. I know I am. The room was listening now. People were putting down their forks. Phones were getting pulled out to record. This was the father-daughter moment everyone had been waiting for. And to Derek, I continued, I want to say. That's when I felt the hands on the back of my head. It happened so fast I didn't have time to process it. 1 second I'm standing there with my glass raised, speaking from my heart. The next second, Derek's behind me, grinning like a kid who just thought of the perfect prank. And then he pushed. My face went straight into the cake. Not the edge. Not a gentle smush. Straight into the middle of that towering monstrosity of white frosting and vanilla cake. My nose crumpled against the first layer. My forehead mashed against the second. My whole face was buried in sugar and humiliation. The room exploded into laughter. Not nervous laughter. Not uncomfortable laughter. Pure, unfiltered, belly-shaking laughter from people who just witnessed something they'd never forget. I felt the frosting in my ears, coating my eyelashes, filling my mouth. The sweet taste was nauseating now. The smell that had seemed so pleasant earlier was suffocating me. I pulled my face out slowly, deliberately. Frosting dripped down my suit, down my shirt, down the front of the tie I'd bought special for this occasion. Derek was still laughing. His hand was on my shoulder like we were buddies sharing a joke. Guess that's the only thing he can afford to contribute, he shouted, and the crowd roared again. I looked at Elena. She was giggling. Nervously, yes. But she was giggling. She wasn't getting up to defend me. She wasn't telling Derek to stop. She was laughing at her father like he'd deserved it. Like he was the joke. That's when something inside me didn't just break, it crystallized. I didn't feel angry. I felt clear. Cold clear. The kind of clarity that comes when you finally understand exactly who people are, and you stop expecting anything different from them. I set the glass down on the nearest table. I didn't say anything. Didn't yell. Didn't make a scene. I just looked at the event coordinator, a young woman named Sarah who'd worked with my catering company for 5 years, and I caught her eye. I tilted my head toward the hallway. She followed me out. "I need you to shut this down," I said quietly. Sarah's face went confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "The wedding. The entire event. I want it stopped. Right now." She stared at me like I'd asked her to commit a crime. "Mr. Corrin, I don't understand. The wedding is almost over. Everything's been perfect. Why would you?" "Because I'm the one paying for it," I said. "And I want it stopped." I could see the calculation happening in her eyes. She was doing the math. Thinking about contracts, about consequences, about whether I actually had the authority to do this. "The entire event," I continued, "is being paid through a trust in my name. The venue, the catering, the band, the flowers, all of it. Without my authorization, none of this can continue. So I'm asking you, professionally and respectfully, to make it stop." Sarah's face went white. Chalk white. The kind of white you go when you realize the rug is about to be pulled out from under someone's feet. I need to verify that," she said. "Check with the venue management," I told her. "Check your contract. It's all there." She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. I watched her dial the venue's owner, watched her voice get smaller as she asked the questions. I could see the moment she understood I wasn't bluffing. "I can do it," she whispered. "I can stop everything." "But Mr. Corrin, are you sure?" "This is—" "I'm sure," I said. And I was. I'd never been more sure of anything in my life. I walked back into the reception. The party was still going. Derek was telling another story to another group of people. Elena was standing with her bridesmaids, laughing about something. The band was playing. The hired servers were circulating with trays of champagne I'd paid for. I caught Sarah's eye again. She gave me a small nod. Then she did something I'll never forget. She walked over to the band's leader, said something quietly, and pointed to the sound system. The music stopped mid-song. It wasn't a dramatic halt. It was smooth, professional. But it was a stop. A full, complete stop. The crowd's energy shifted immediately. You could feel it. That moment when people realize something's wrong but can't quite figure out what. Derek turned around, still grinning like an idiot. "What's going on? Why'd they stop playing?" Sarah picked up the microphone. Her voice was steady, but I could see her hands trembling slightly. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize, but we're experiencing a situation with the venue arrangements. I'm going to have to ask everyone to pause. We need to address some contract issues before we can continue." Murmurs spread through the crowd. People exchanged looks. This wasn't part of the program. Derek stepped forward, his smile fading. "What situation? What are you talking about? We paid in full." Sarah glanced at me. I gave her a nod. "Actually, sir," Sarah said carefully, "the payment came through a trust belonging to Mr. Raymond Corrin. The entire event, the venue, catering, decorations, entertainment, it's all under his contract with our company. Without his authorization, we're unable to continue any portion of the festivities." You could have heard a pin drop. Derek's face went red. Not embarrassed red. Angry red. The kind of red that comes when a man realizes he's been exposed as a fraud. Elena's hand slipped off his arm. I walked forward slowly, calmly, like a man who'd finally found his peace. The crowd parted for me. Nobody was laughing now. I looked Derek directly in the eye. 5 minutes, I said quietly. That's how long it takes to lose everything when you forget who made your happiness possible. Then I turned to Sarah. Cancel everything under my name. The band packed up their instruments. The servers stopped serving. The venue management appeared from the back rooms looking confused and apologetic. The guests started gathering their things, checking their phones, realizing that the party was over. And Derek Vaughn stood in the middle of that beautiful ballroom with his new wife, watching his perfect day crumble around him like the frosting that had been on my face just minutes before. The aftermath felt different than I expected. I thought I'd feel triumphant. I thought I'd feel victorious. I thought I'd feel something. But mostly, I just felt tired. I went home that night and walked through my house like a ghost. Every room felt too quiet, too empty. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat in the kitchen where Sarah used to sit, where I'd sat alone for 5 years, where I was sitting alone again now. My phone started buzzing around midnight. Text messages from people who'd been at the wedding. Calls from friends asking what had happened. Social media was already lighting up with speculation. I turned my phone off. The next morning, the doorbell rang. It was Elena. She was still in the clothes from yesterday. Her makeup was smeared. Her hair was a mess. She looked like she hadn't slept. When she saw me, she didn't say hello. She just started crying. I brought her inside and we sat on the couch. The same couch where Derek had sat that first night, sizing up my life and finding it lacking. "Why didn't you tell me?" Elena sobbed. "Why did you let me think you were broke?" I handed her a tissue and took a long breath. "Because I needed to know who you were," I said. "And I needed Derek to show me who he was." She looked up at me with red-rimmed eyes. "What do you mean?" "Your mother told me something before she died," I said. "She told me to let you take care of me." I didn't understand that for a long time. But I think she meant that sometimes we need to let people see who we really are. Not the successful version. Not the impressive version. Just the real version. Elena was quiet for a long time. "I couldn't figure out why Derek married me," I continued. "And then I realized he didn't marry you. He married the idea of what he thought you could give him. Money. Status. A better life. When he thought you had those things, he was all charming and ambitious. But the second he realized you didn't, the mask came off." "He was so nice at first," Elena whispered. "He was never nice," I said gently. "He was always what he showed you at that wedding. He was just better at hiding it." She cried for a long time after that. The kind of crying that comes from understanding you've made a mistake. From realizing the man you thought you'd marry wasn't who you thought he was. Days passed. Derek called a few times, tried to smooth things over, tried to convince Elena that what happened at the wedding was just a joke that went too far. But by then, Elena was seeing him clearly. She was understanding what I'd understood from the beginning. 3 weeks later, she came back. This time without her ring. "I'm staying with you for a while," she said. "If that's okay." "It's more than okay," I told her. The divorce papers arrived 6 months later. Derek fought for everything. Claimed he'd made financial contributions that he'd never made. Sued for alimony from a woman who'd never had money to begin with. It was pathetic, really. Like watching a man fight a battle he'd already lost. Elena got the house they'd bought together. Not because she won, because Derek couldn't afford to pay for it anymore. His gambling habit had caught up with him. His business deals had started falling apart once people realized the kind of person he really was. That's the thing about people like Derek. They survive on momentum and charm for a while. But eventually, the truth catches up. Eventually, people figure them out. Elena threw herself into work. Started taking night classes to build a career. Stopped waiting for someone to rescue her and started rescuing herself. I watched my daughter become a woman, and I was proud. Proud in a way that had nothing to do with money, or weddings, or first impressions. One afternoon, about a year after the wedding, I was working in my shop when Elena came in. She looked different. Happier. More herself. "I got the promotion," she said. I stood up and hugged her like she'd just told me she'd won the lottery. "That's incredible," I said. "I'm so proud of you." "I was thinking," she said, pulling back, "that I want to be honest with you about something. About everything, really." We sat down on a couple of old stools, and she told me about her fears. About how she'd been so desperate to believe in Derek that she'd ignored every red flag. About how she'd been afraid of being alone. About how she'd almost married the wrong person because she was too scared to be honest about who she really was. "I'm sorry," she said, "for laughing at you at the wedding. For choosing him over you." I took her hand. "You don't have anything to apologize for. You were learning. You're still learning. We all are. But you knew," she said. "You knew exactly who he was from the beginning." "I suspected," I said. "But suspecting and knowing are different things. And I wasn't going to tell you who to trust. I was going to let you figure it out yourself." She was quiet for a moment. Then she asked me the question I'd been waiting for her to ask since I walked out of that reception hall. "Was it worth it, Dad? All that planning. All that money. Just to teach me a lesson?" I thought about that for a long time. "No," I finally said. "It wasn't about teaching you a lesson. It was about you being happy. Even if it took the hard way to get there." She squeezed my hand, and we sat together in the quiet of my workshop, surrounded by tools and half-finished projects and the life I'd built without needing anyone to applaud me for it. A letter arrived at my house 2 years after the wedding. The envelope was expensive. The handwriting was Derek's. I almost threw it away without opening it, but something made me stop. Some part of me wanted to know if he'd finally understood what he'd lost. I opened it. It was an apology letter. Not a real one. The kind where someone's sorry only because they're broke and desperate. He was asking for money. Claiming he'd made mistakes. Promising he'd changed. He hadn't changed. People like Derek don't change. They just get more desperate. I put the letter in the fireplace and watched it burn. That night, I sat in my workshop and looked around at all the things I'd built with my own 2 hands over the years. Furniture. Shelves. Cabinets. A grandfather clock I'd been restoring for the past decade. Small things. Useful things. Things that would outlast me. That's what I understood now, that pride wasn't about showing off. Pride was about doing things right. About building things that mattered. About being the kind of man who didn't need to prove himself to anyone. Elena came over on Sundays now. She'd bring dinner. We'd eat together. She'd tell me about her job, her new friends, the man she was seeing who treated her with respect because she demanded it. I'd listen and feel grateful that my daughter had finally learned what I'd known all along, that the only person worth impressing is yourself. The wedding became a story we barely talked about. It didn't define our relationship. It didn't define Elena's life. It was just a moment, a painful moment, yes, but a moment nonetheless. Sometimes people ask me if I regret how I handled it. If I wish I'd told Derek off instead of shutting everything down. If I wish I'd been the man who'd yelled and fought instead of the man who'd simply walked away. But I don't regret it. Because here's what I learned, that humiliation doesn't change people. Arguments don't change people. Only consequences change people. And sometimes the most powerful consequence is silence. Derek Vaughan learned that he couldn't buy respect. That he couldn't charm his way through life. That there were people in this world who couldn't be impressed by his confidence, or his ambition, or his suit. And I learned that I didn't need to be impressive to matter. That my worth wasn't measured in wedding budgets or how many people loved me. That being the man who builds things, who stands on his word, who takes care of his daughter, who stays quiet when others need to hear it, that's worth more than any applause. Sarah used to say to me, before she died, "Raymond, you're going to teach Elena the most important lesson of her life someday. And it's going to hurt both of you before she understands it." I think that day at the wedding was that lesson. Not because I humiliated Derek. Not because I showed him up in front of 200 people. But because I showed Elena what happens when you forget where your blessings come from. What happens when you mistake charm for character. What happens when you let someone else define your worth. And I showed myself that staying silent isn't weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing a man can do. If you've made it this far, you're the kind of person who believes that respect matters. That character counts. That not everything in life needs to be loud to be powerful. If that resonates with you, I need you to do something. Hit that subscribe button. Turn on your notifications. Don't miss the stories that are coming to this channel. Stories about people who've been tested, about fathers and daughters, about the moments that change us forever. And I want you to do something else. Drop a comment. Tell me your story. Tell me about a time when you had to choose between your pride and your peace. Tell me about someone who taught you what real strength looks like. Because that's what this community is about. It's about sharing these moments. It's about learning from each other. It's about understanding that we're not alone in our struggles. Your thoughts, your experiences, your stories, they matter. They inspire others. They remind us all that we're human, that we've been hurt, and that we've survived. So please, comment, share, subscribe, and come back for the next story. Because this channel is filled with stories like Raymond's. Stories about betrayal and redemption. Stories about finding your voice. Stories about standing tall when the world tries to knock you down. I'll see you in the next one.